Alright, what's going on everyone? Today, we're going to be upgrading the Dimir Rogues Challenger deck on a budget. We will try to not exceed $30 USD with our upgrades, and if that currency isn't relevant to you, we'll basically try not to spend about the deck's retail price. The decks typically sell for $25 to $30 each, $25 to $35 each. We'll try to hit around $30, so roughly the price of the deck is going to be our budget. Before we start, you should know there are two different builds when it comes to Dimir Rogues. This deck that comes out of the box is modeled after the creature based version, where you play small rogues that mill early and then play late game beaters that take advantage of that milling in the mid to late game. There is also a more controlling variant of the deck that uses Lurrus in the sideboard and Ruin Crab in the main board. So Lurrus doesn't allow you to play permanents with high mana cost, so the deck removes the big beaters. You have to take out Nighthawk Scavenger, you have to take out Zera's Son, and the idea is to play a more control game where you get long-term value by just, being able to replay stuff out of your graveyard over and over again with Lurrus. And because you're dragging the game out so long, Ruin Crab has more time to just mill out the opponent. So the control deck just wants to outvalue the opponent and control the game for as long as possible, and just try to get value out of the graveyard and mill the opponent out, whereas the creature-based deck is just trying to mill early and beat down in the mid to late game. And it should be noted that the Kaldheim Championship just happened recently, and Dimir Rogues actually won the whole thing. This deck won the Kaldheim Championship, so I'll leave a link to that deck list below, and it was the more controlling variant, which typically wins high-end tournaments just because, professional players are generally better at playing control decks and generally favor control decks. Doesn't mean it's right for you, but it was the championship winning deck. So anyway, in this video, I will show you how to upgrade into both builds, but I've rambled too long. Let's get started. We will start with the creature-based deck, since this deck is basically done in that regard. We just need to make a few minor changes. We're going to take out 3 Vantress Gargoyles for 3 Into the Stories. I know this is kind of ironic. I'm saying this is the creature build, and I've taken out a creature for a spell, but basically every rogue deck ever plays Into the Story. It's really, really good. And while Vantress Gargoyle is kind of cute, it can be very powerful. It's also just very inconsistent. You can't always attack with it. You can't always block with it. It's just not reliable. And Into the Story is basically always good, which is why most competitive players prefer that over the creature. Also note that you already have 2 Into the Story in the sideboard, so if you want to make this upgrade, literally you can do it out of your sideboard. Just take your 2 Into the Story out, put it in the main board, take 2 Gargoyles out, and there you go. Easy enough. You can even put the Gargoyles into the deck and play them against self-mill decks, like the Kroxa decks, right? The Kroxa decks try to mill themselves to get Kroxa into the graveyard. So if you're playing against that, then you could probably bring the Gargoyles in. So yeah, that's actually an option. Feel free to just swap those, that's fine. Anyway, next we'll take out 2 Eliminates and replace them with Lofty Denial. Although if you don't like playing counter spells, then just Heartless Axe and Bloodchief's Thirst work here as well. If you don't like playing blue control, you can just swap it with more removal, that's fine. But Lofty Denial is pretty great. It works well in this deck because so many of the creatures have flying. And also, by the way, if you don't like Lofty Denial, Didn't Say Please and Mystical Dispute also work just fine here. Didn't Say Please is particularly good because it mills, but it is a 3 mana counter spell. Mystical Dispute also 3 mana, but can occasionally be 1 mana. And yeah, both of those are totally fine, but Lofty Denial is what I'm recommending. I do want to note, however, that while Eliminate isn't relevant right now, hold on to these. Don't sell them. Don't throw them out or whatever, because it may become relevant if a 3 mana Planeswalker becomes relevant in Standard. And we have seen that Strixhaven does have 3 mana Planeswalkers, or at least 1, with Kazmina. So if Kazmina becomes a format staple, then this might be a sideboard staple for your deck. So hold on to these and we'll see if Kazmina becomes relevant in Standard. Alright, anyway, that's basically it, sort of. This deck really didn't need much. Technically there is Brazen Borrower. The deck does need 4 Brazen Borrowers to finish it off, and this is one of the problems because these are $10 each. So if you want all 4, unfortunately, it's about $40. But if you do want to add the Brazen Borrowers, maybe you have some, maybe you're willing to buy a few, whatever, you can remove the Black Bloom Rogues and the Malakir Rebirth. Neither of these are played at all, they're not really useful in this deck. I mean, the Black Bloom Rogues are fine, but they're not as good as Brazen Borrower. So maybe if you bought the Simic Flash deck last year and you have 1 Brazen Borrower, by all means add it into place of Malakir Rebirth. And if you have a couple more, then you can take out the Black Bloom Rogues for Brazen Borrowers, and that makes a lot more sense. And at this point, yeah, you basically have a tier 1 Dimir Rogues, at least the more creature focused build. I told you when I previewed these decks that the Rogues deck was the best and basically done out of the box, and as you can see, other than needing Brazen Borrowers, which are kind of expensive, the deck was basically done out of the box. Pretty crazy. Also, you can improve the mana base with Fabled Passages and Pathways. They are expensive, but they will help with getting color screwed. If you have them, definitely add them, but obviously that is very expensive. We could also improve the sideboard, but we'll take a look at that after we upgrade the control version since it's the same information regardless. So moving on to the control build. First off, much like the previous build, we'll take out Vantress Gargoyle for Into the Story for all the same reasons. It's a lot of card draw, and this version of the deck likes that even more since it needs to control the board. Control decks love to draw cards so they can draw into more removal spells, so this is even more relevant in this version of the deck. We'll also take out Rankle for a 4th Into the Story because we can't play Rankle anyway. Lurrus isn't going to allow us to play a 4-mana creature, so Into the Story goes into the deck there. Then we take out the Xerath Sans for Ruin Crabs. Once again, we can't play this creature. It's a 5-mana creature, which Lurrus forbids, so you have to take it out regardless, and the deck does play 3 Ruin Crabs, easy enough. And likewise, we'll take out 1 Nighthawk Scavenger for a 4th Ruin Crab. This is just painful. Nighthawk Scavenger is my favorite creature in the deck. It's so fun, but alas, it's not playable with Lurrus. I'm so sad. We can also take out the other 2 Nighthawk Scavengers for Mystical Disputes because we'll be spending a lot more time controlling the game in this version of the deck, so we need more counter spells. It still makes me sad though. Nighthawk Scavenger, you did nothing wrong. It's not your fault. Don't let the scary control players hurt your feelings. Poor thing. Anyway, we also can't play the 2 Black Bloom Rogues in this deck with Lurrus as our companion, so out they go for 2 Didn't Say Please, which is a counterspell that also conveniently fills our opponent's graveyard, which is exactly what we want to do. So creature we can't play for more control, because that's what this version does. And then there is the most important piece, Lurrus. Now, if you follow this guide, you should have taken Into the Story out of the sideboard, so you should actually already have an open slot there. So you just fill that spot that had Into the Story with Lurrus. Unfortunately, Lurrus is like $8 to $10, but it's like basically the only expensive card you have to add. As you've been seeing as I've been doing this upgrade guide, everything's bulk. This is the only expensive card you have to buy, and you only need one. You need one in your sideboard as your companion, so it's actually a cheaper build overall, even if you do need this one expensive card. And much like the previous deck, you can upgrade the mana base with Fabled Passages and Pathways if you want. They're much better than the gain lands, the lands that let you gain 1 life. They're much better than basics. Now, as for the sideboard, for both decks, this is really complicated because the sideboards change dramatically as the metagame shifts. I looked at a ton of competitive decks that top 8'd major tournaments, and the sideboard is basically completely different with every deck. Literally deck by deck, there's like no consistency at all. So it's hard to get like an exact list that you should use, and that's how sideboards work anyway. The sideboard should be tailored to your local metagame and what you're playing against. However, I do think the sideboard is overloaded with hand disruption. There's way more hand disruption than any competitive deck uses. So I think you could take out the 3 Duresses for 3 Skyclave Shades. So this is basically a mirror match breaker. If your opponent is also trying to mill you, this allows you to just mill into free threats. It's not even a rogue, it doesn't matter. You just put it in your deck and you get this free constant creature that your opponent gives you by milling you. And it's probably better than the 3 Duresses. Right now there aren't a ton of combo decks that are tier 1, so the amount of hand disruption that this deck comes with probably isn't necessary for the current metagame. There aren't that many combo decks, so for now I don't think the rest is 100% necessary. And keep in mind that the deck already also comes with Agonizing Remorse, so you still have hand disruption in your deck. You just don't need 5 slots of your sideboard dedicated to hand disruption in the current metagame. You can also upgrade the Pestilent Hazes with Crippling Fears. This isn't necessary, but it is a little bit better. They give -3/-3 instead of 2, so it's a little bit more powerful, and you can choose rogues, so it doesn't hit your creatures. Like you play this, you choose rogues, everything else gets wiped out, or all the smaller stuff does. I don't think this is like 100% necessary, but this is typically what the tier 1 decks play. And any other open slots you might have in your sideboard, because I do recommend taking the Into the Stories out, for your main board. But if you have any other open slots in your sideboard. They just go to counter spells that are too narrow for the main board, like Essence Scatter, Disdainful Stroke, stuff like this. These counter spells are really good against specific decks, but you can't really play the main board because you never know if they're going to be useful. You don't want to play Disdainful Stroke and then find out that your opponent is playing a Lurrus deck with no permanents under that cost, right? You don't want to play Essence Scatter and find out you're playing against blue-white control with no creatures. So you don't want to play these main board, but in the sideboard, these are great and you can bring them in when they're relevant, and they're more powerful than the more generic counter spells just because they're cheaper. And that's it. That's it for upgrades. Like I said, these decks were basically done. So check the description, guys. I'll leave links to both versions of our upgrades. I will leave a link to that Kaldheim Championship. But yeah, guys, that's it. Thanks for watching. I hope that was helpful, and I will see you in the next one.